In the 2006-2007 season, UEFA introduced the homegrown players rule. The UEFA rules state as follows. No club may have more than 25 players on List A during the season. As a minimum, 8 places are reserved exclusively for locally trained players, and no club may have more than 4 association-trained players listed in these 8 places on List A. What does that mean? Each team is allowed to register a maximum of 25 players for their Champions League campaign. This is called the A-list squad. From those 25 players, at least 8 have to be homegrown. But what is a homegrown player? A homegrown player is a football player who was trained by clubs from the same national league between the ages of 15 and 21 for at least 3 years. We will take Joselu from Real Madrid as an example. Joselu spent his entire youth at Celta de Vigo until he was sold to Real Madrid at 19 years old. This means that he already spent more than 3 years in the same national league between the ages of 15 and 21. So Joselu counts as a homegrown player for Real Madrid. To make things more complicated, 4 out of the 8 homegrown players have to be from the club's youth system. Since Real Madrid signed Joselu at first at 19 years old, he was already too old to qualify as a homegrown player from Real Madrid itself. If you've ever wondered why Nacho Fernandez and Lucas Vazquez have played their entire career at Real Madrid despite lacking exceptional abilities, you might have your answer now. Let's take Real Madrid's entire squad as an example. 8 of the 25 squad players have to be homegrown, and 4 of those 8 have to be trained by the club itself. Nacho, Lucas Vazquez, Dani Carvajal, and Fran Garcia spent most of their youth at Real Madrid Castilla, which qualifies them as homegrown from the same club. The following 4 homegrown players might surprise you. Federico Valverde was brought from the Uruguayan team Peñarol the day he turned 18. The same tactic was used for Vinicius Jr., Rodrigo, and Eduardo Camavinga. They were all brought when they were 18 years old, and as soon as they spent 3 years at Real Madrid before turning 22, they count as homegrown. This means that Real Madrid has 8 homegrown players from their own youth system. Other players who qualify as homegrown from the same national association are Kepa, Dani Ceballos, and Joselu. So a total of 11 out of the 25 Real Madrid squad players are qualified as homegrown. This might be a reason why clubs might overpay for players from their own country. As mentioned before, the rules only apply to the A-list squad. The A-list squad consists of the 25 registered players, of which 8 have to be homegrown. The B-list squad consists of players who have not reached the age of 21 yet, also known as under 21s. So the homegrown rule does not apply to under 21 players. Garnacho from Manchester United, for example, is a B-list player. Another reason for overspending are the EU regulations. Since the Bosman ruling in 1995, national football associations are banned from imposing any restrictions on foreign EU players. Before this ruling, only 3 non-Spanish players were allowed per squad in La Liga. As of today, there is just a quota for non-EU players. Each club in La Liga is allowed to have 5 non-EU players and 3 non-EU players in each matchday squad. Surprisingly, only Lunin and Arda Güler are non-EU players from Real Madrid. Bellingham has an Irish second citizenship. Rodrigo, Vinicius, Valverde, and Militao have a second Spanish citizenship. This rule makes EU players more valuable than non-EU players. The Premier League liked these rules so much, they decided to implement their own homegrown players rules in 2010. The goal of these rules was for England to win the World Cup in 2022. These rules would force Premier League teams to give English players more chances in the starting 11, which should lead to more English talent breaking through. With the strength of the current English national team, you could argue this approach has worked, despite not winning the World Cup. A Premier League team must have at least 8 homegrown players in a squad of 25 players. Currently, to be classified as homegrown, one must be on an English team for at least 3 years before the age of 21. In UEFA regulations, you must be at least 15 years old for the 3 years to begin counting. This is different with the Premier League rules. But then Brexit happened. The UK voted to leave the European Union. This meant that football players from EU countries could no longer appeal to their EU rights. They no longer had the right to work in the UK. Premier League teams could also no longer sign players who had not reached the age of 18 yet. The only way right now to qualify as homegrown as a non-English player is to sign for an English club at 18 years old and spend the next 3 years under contract at an English club. This is, for example, how Arsenal made William Saliba a homegrown player. The Frenchman was signed from Saint Etienne at 18 years old. He spent the next 3 years loaned out in Ligue 1, but under contract with Arsenal. This makes Saliba a homegrown player in the Premier League. Manchester United is playing a very risky game for their future. For the 2023-24 season, they only had 8 homegrown players. That's probably the reason why Manchester United brought back Johnny Evans instead of someone else. Another homegrown player Manchester United brought last summer was Mason Mount. Some might argue that a transfer fee of $64 million is too much for Mount, but his homegrown status makes him worth several extra millions. Harry Maguire is also a homegrown player. You could argue that without his classification, Manchester United would not have paid $87 million for the Englishman, but somewhere in the range of $60 million. It all really depends on the composition of the squad and how badly the team needs another homegrown player. The benefit of these strict rules is that once a club complies with the Premier League homegrown rules, the club basically complies with the UEFA homegrown rules. Another tactic many Premier League teams use is to have a homegrown third keeper. For example, Manchester United has 38-year-old Tom Heaton, Manchester City has 38-year-old Scott Carson, and Tottenham even has a third and fourth goalie who are homegrown players that never play. What happens when a team does not meet the 8 homegrown player requirement? For every missing homegrown player, the squad size gets reduced by 1. A team can only register 17 non-homegrown players, so if a team has no homegrown players, the squad will consist of just 17 players. If a team has 5 homegrown players, the squad size will be 17 plus 5, which is 22 players. The Liverpool 2023-2024 squad only had 6 homegrown players. This means their squad consisted of 23 players. It can be filled with under 21 players, so this isn't really a problem for Liverpool, but if Jurgen Klopp complains about a lack of depth, it is because of a poor squad composition. For the future, we can expect several record-breaking transfers featuring English homegrown players. Since the Premier League teams have the most money to spend, we can expect them to spend big on homegrown players. Jamal Musiala spent 8 years in the youth academy of Chelsea, which classifies him as a homegrown player for English teams. That's why you can expect the top English clubs to spend more than $100 million for the German international in the future. The same applies to Jude Bellingham, as he spent his youth at Birmingham City. Lastly, I would like to name a few surprising homegrown players in the Premier League which might explain their transfer fee. Robert Sanchez from Chelsea, Emi Martinez from Aston Villa, Gabriel Martinelli from Arsenal, João Pedro from Brighton, Nathan Ake from Manchester City, and David Raya from Arsenal. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment what kind of videos you would like to see next.